Here then, we have 23 out of our 39 fathers who framed the government under which we live, who have, upon their official responsibility and their corporal oaths, acted upon the very question which the text affirms they understood just as well and even better than we do now. And 21 of them, a clear majority of the whole 39, so acting upon it as to make them guilty of gross political impropriety and willful perjury if, in their understanding, any proper division between local and federal authority or anything in the Constitution they had made themselves and sworn to support forbade the federal government to control as to slavery in the federal territories. Thus, the 21 acted, and as actions speak louder than words, so actions under such responsibility speak still louder. 2 of the 23 voted against congressional prohibition of slavery in the federal territories in the instances in which they acted upon the question, but for what reasons they so voted is not known. They may have done so because they thought a proper division of local from federal authority or some provision or principle of the Constitution stood in the way, or they may, without any such question, have voted against the prohibition on what appeared to them to be sufficient grounds of expediency. No one who has sworn to support the Constitution can conscientiously vote for what he understands to be an unconstitutional measure, however expedient he may think it. But one may and ought to vote against a measure which he deems constitutional if, at the same time, he deems it inexpedient. It, therefore, would be unsafe to set down even the 2 who voted against the prohibition as having done so because, in their understanding, any proper division of local from federal authority or anything in the Constitution forbade the federal government to control as to slavery in federal territory. The remaining 16 of the 39, so far as I have discovered, have left no record of their understanding upon the direct question of federal control of slavery in the federal territories. But there is much reason to believe that their understanding upon that question would not have appeared different from that of their 23 compeers had it been manifested at all. For the purpose of adhering rigidly to the text, I have purposely omitted whatever understanding may have been manifested by any person, however distinguished, other than the 39 fathers who framed the original Constitution. And for the same reason, I have also omitted whatever understanding may have been manifested by any of the 39, even on any other phase of the general question of slavery. If we should look into their acts and declarations on those other phases, as the foreign slave trade and the morality and policy of slavery generally, it would appear to us that on the direct question of federal control of slavery in federal territories, the 16, if they had acted at all, would probably have acted just as the 23 did. Among that 16 were several of the most noted anti-slavery men of those times, as Dr. Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and Gouverneur Morris, while there was not one now known to have been otherwise, unless it may be John Rutledge of South Carolina. The sum of the whole is that of our 39 fathers who framed the original Constitution, 21, a clear majority of the whole, certainly understood that no proper division of local from federal authority nor any part of the Constitution forbade the federal government to control slavery in the federal territories, while all the rest probably had the same understanding. Such, unquestionably, was the understanding of our fathers who framed the original Constitution, and the text affirms that they understood the question better than we. But so far, I have been considering the understanding of the question manifested by the framers of the original Constitution. In and by the original instrument, a mode was provided for amending it. And, as I have already stated, the present frame of the government under which we live consists of that original and 12 amendments adopted since. Those who now insist that federal control of slavery in federal territories violates the Constitution point us to the provisions which they suppose it thus violates, and, as I understand, that all fix upon provisions in these amendatory articles and not in the original instrument. The Supreme Court, in the Dred Scott case, plant themselves upon the Fifth Amendment, which provides that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, while Senator Douglas and his peculiar adherents plant themselves upon the 10th Amendment, providing that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now, it so happens that these amendments were framed by the first Congress which sat under the Constitution, the identical Congress which passed the act already mentioned enforcing the prohibition of slavery in the Northwestern Territory. Not only was it the same Congress, but they were the identical same individual men who, at the same session and at the same time within the session, had under consideration and in progress toward maturity these constitutional amendments and this act prohibiting slavery in all the territory the nation then owned. The constitutional amendments were introduced before and passed after the act enforcing the Ordinance of '87, so that during the whole pendency of the act to enforce the ordinance, the constitutional amendments were also pending. The 76 members of that Congress, including 16 of the framers of the original Constitution, as before stated, were preeminently our fathers who framed that part of the government under which we live, which is now claimed as forbidding the federal government to control slavery in the federal territories. Is it not a little presumptuous in anyone at this day to affirm that the two things which that Congress deliberately framed and carried to maturity at the same time are absolutely inconsistent with each other? And does not such affirmation become impudently absurd when coupled with the other affirmation from the same mouth that those who did the two things, alleged to be inconsistent, understood whether they really were inconsistent better than we, better than he who affirms that they are inconsistent? It is surely safe to assume that the 39 framers of the original Constitution and the 76 members of the Congress which framed the amendments thereto taken together do certainly include those who may be fairly called our fathers who framed the government under which we live. And so, assuming, I defy any man to show that any one of them ever in his whole life declared that in his understanding any proper division of local from federal authority or any part of the Constitution forbade the federal government to control as to slavery in the federal territory. I go a step further. I defy anyone to show that any living man in the whole world ever did prior to the beginning of the present century, and I might almost say prior to the beginning of the last half of the present century, declare that, in his understanding, any proper division of local from federal authority or any part of the Constitution forbade the federal government to control as to slavery in the federal territories. To those who now so declare, I give not only our fathers who framed the government under which we live, but with them all other living men within the century in which it was framed, among whom to search, and they shall not be able to find the evidence of a single man with them.